So Christmas is coming up. That means nativity sets are coming out to decorate people's homes. And I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the original Christian nativity scene because it's a little bit different than our nativity scenes today. And I think it's something very edifying to look at the nativity through early Christian eyes, how they understood it. So let's talk about some of the earliest depictions of the nativity. They date to about 1,700 years ago, so very ancient. And I think you'll learn something new. So multiple nativity icons survive that date to the 4th century, and they've been discovered on sarcophagi. So the stone material allows them to survive a long time. And some of them date to the 5th century, 4th century, but some of them possibly dating even back to the 3rd century. We know that St. Helena in the 4th century put a nativity scene on the wall of the church in Bethlehem. So at the location where Jesus was born, there was an icon of the nativity all the way back in the 4th century put there by St. Helena. Now, the universal elements in every early Christian icon of the nativity might surprise you. So, of course, in every scene of the nativity is Jesus. He's wrapped in cloths. They actually look like burial cloths, which is interesting. And he's lying in a manger. The manger either looks like a basket or a table or a basket with table legs. But that's how the early Christians understood the manger to look. But there is always, in every single depiction, an ox and a donkey who are looking over at Jesus in the manger. And this is understood as a fulfillment of Isaiah 1:3, which says the ox knows its master and the donkey its master's crib. And in the Septuagint, it actually says the phatnin, which is the same word that Luke uses for manger in his gospel. So there's a direct connection, linguistic connection between the manger in Luke's gospel and the phatnin in this the Septuagintal Isaiah 1:3. So if the early Christians were reading this in Greek, they would immediately recognize the connection. Oh my gosh, this is talking about the manger. This is a prophecy of Christ. And interestingly, multiple instances of the Nativity don't have Mary. In fact, they don't have much of anything else but these animals over the manger. And it really forces us to see the Nativity in a little bit different light, how the early Christians saw it. They were not focusing so much on the story, this cute little story of how baby Jesus was born, but they're actually focusing on the prophecy and the fulfillment of that prophecy and the salvation made available to the Gentiles via the incarnation. So these two animals actually represent the Jews and the Gentiles who are both now able to be side by side sons of God. So there's not only a fulfillment of prophecy, but a message of the gospel in these two animals. And it explains why they are so consistent and important in icons where you can not have Joseph, you can not have Mary even, as long as those two animals are there with Jesus over the manger. That's the main point for early Christians because that's the part that connects it to the fulfillment of prophecy, which is very interesting. St. Gregory the theologian writes, "Know as Isaiah bids thee, thine owner, like the ox and like the donkey, thy master's crib. If thou be one of those," talking about the Jews, "who are pure and lawful food, and who chew the cud of the word and are fit for sacrifice, or if thou art one of those," talking about the Gentiles, "who are as yet unclean and uneatable and unfit for sacrifice, and of the Gentile portion, run with the star, and bear thy gifts with the Magi, gold and frankincense and myrrh, as to a king, and to God, and not to one who is dead for thee. For with shepherds glorify him, with angels join in chorus, with archangels sing hymns." So St. Gregory the theologian is looking at this Isaiah 1:3. He's interpreting these two animals as representing the Jews and the Gentiles who are both worshiping God side by side. And the icon is pointing to that message through the incarnation, which is a very interesting, maybe slightly different interpretation of the story than you're used to hearing around Christmas time. But we're looking back 1,700 years to the early church, how they understood the story and what stood out to them about the Nativity. And I think their icons tell us something edifying and profound about this event. So here's an example of the Nativity icon. This is from the sarcophagus of Stilicho from Milan, Italy. And in this image, there's Jesus wrapped in the clothes and the manger and the two animals. That's it. There's no Mary here. There's no Joseph. There's no shepherds. There's no angels. It's just Jesus and the two animals. So you can really see that the early Christians valued the message of the gospel through these animals as representing us, as coming to worship God, us being non-Jews. So the Jews and the Gentiles both are welcome to worship their Lord because of this incarnation. But there are other instances of the nativity icon which have other elements, and of course, some of these include Mary. And when Mary is there, she's sitting near the manger with her hand on her chin, as you can see in this picture, and she's seemingly pondering. So she's sitting near the manger pondering. And this is probably a depiction of Luke 2:19, which says Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. Also typical is the star above Mary's head. If Mary's there, there's usually a star there. And then a shepherd is often there by the manger, typically pointing to the star. And oftentimes there are three magi in either nearby or connected or above or around this image, and they're traveling pointing to the star as well. So this is an example of the sarcophagus of Marcus Claudianus from Rome that dates to the 4th century. You can see the shepherd here, and he's leaning on his staff. And again, there are the two animals. You'll see them in every single early Christian depiction because that's part of the core message of the Nativity for early Christians. But this is an example of from France, from Arles, France. This is the sarcophagus of the Nativity stone. And it's kind of the quintessential early Christian depiction of the Nativity. You have Mary with her hand on her chin. She's pondering in her heart these events. You have the shepherd. He's pointing to the star. You have Jesus in this little basket table manger. And you have the ox and the donkey looking over at Jesus. And then connected to this image is another image of the three magi. And they're pointing to the star, traveling on their way to see Jesus. So these would have been the original elements of the nativity icon in early Christianity. Another example is the sarcophagus of Adelphia from Sicily. And again, all the same core elements. Jesus is wrapped in the clothes in the basket manger. The ox and the donkey are looking over at Jesus. You have the shepherd pointing at the star. Mary is sitting nearby pondering. And then the three magi are on their way pointing to that star. So there were later additions that were added to this icon. By the 7th century, Mary goes from a position of sitting to more of a position of reclining and on some kind of mattress. And later, two midwives were added, or one midwife named Salome and Salome, and they're outside the cave bathing Jesus. Okay, and Uspensky notes that this is based on the apocryphal Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, chapter 13, and the Proto-Evangelium of James, chapter 14. So these both make references to a midwife. The Pseudo-Matthew example talks about two midwives bathing Jesus. And Uspensky interprets this as truthful events, actual historical events, even though they're preserved in apocryphal works. So you won't see these in the earliest icons. You will see them in later icons around the 6th, 7th century and later. And I guess the traditional understanding is that they're true, but they are based off of apocryphal accounts. And of course, later Joseph was added, but he's not added very close to the manger. He's kind of far away from it, sitting, resting his hand on his head, pondering. Later angels were added, and a pasture was added showing shepherds in the field. So we have an example of this. This is a panel painting icon from St. Catherine Monastery. It dates to the 6th or 7th century. And you can see in the middle those core elements. There's Jesus in the manger wrapped in the clothes, and it looks like a little basket table. You have the oxen, or the ox and the donkey are looking over at Jesus. Mary is here to the side, but now she's kind of reclining. You have the star above her head. Angels have been added. There's now a pasture, and a shepherd is there playing a flute. You still have the shepherd pointing to the star, but now he's in the bottom corner there, but his hand is lifted like he's pointing to the star. So that element is still there. The three magi are traveling on their way. The two midwives are there bathing Jesus, and Joseph is sitting there pondering these things, and is later interpreted as struggling with doubt about these events. Here's another example. This is a wall fresco from Santa Maria fuori Portas in Italy. And you can see Mary there reclining. The two midwives are still visible. Joseph is visible. The pasture angels. A shepherd is there. And one of the midwives is holding her hand by Mary. That's a part of that apocryphal account, that her hand got injured because she touched Mary, but then she touched Jesus and her hand was healed. So that's, again, part of that pseudo gospel of Matthew. And an even later update would have been a medieval edition, was adding a shepherd speaking to Joseph, interpreted as the devil tempting Joseph. And again, Uspensky attributes this to apocryphal accounts, and it isn't universally featured in icons today, but it was probably the last or latest addition to the icon. But some traditional Orthodox icons have all of these elements still there, still intact, calling back to that original core early Christian depiction. So I have an example here. You can see Mary is kneeling by the manger, and Jesus is there wrapped in clothes. The ox and the donkey are there, core elements of the icon. The magi are traveling, angels have been added, a star is high above them. Joseph is here, a shepherd is in the pasture playing a flute, and then there's a shepherd there on the side looking at the star and the angel. So there's the ox and the donkey, and Jesus in the manger. The magi are traveling, Mary's there pondering the things in her heart, a shepherd is there. So you can see this icon is based off of very ancient elements from the original nativity scene from the early church. So if you have a nativity set this year and it looks something like this, you might want to rearrange it if you want to be more accurate to that original Christian nativity set. It would look something like this. You'd have the donkey and the ox right there at the manger, right, symbols of the Jews and the Gentiles worshiping Jesus side by side now in the same category. And Mary is there to the side, pondering in her heart, and Joseph is there off to the side, and maybe he's struggling with believing all of this. So that's today's video, talking about the nativity set of the early church. If you put up a nativity set this year, I hope that you see it in a little bit different light, and maybe can see for yourself the gospel in a deeper way this year. So thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, leave a comment below. I love hearing from you, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.